Hi, and welcome to the Social Mobility Commission's Masterclass on leadership and culture. And this is all about leadership. Inclusion is not just led by the leaders, it's owned and driven by all. So my name's Paula Kemp. I am the Head of Employer Engagement here at the Social Mobility Commission, and I'm joined today not only by colleagues from Superdrug, who I'll introduce you to shortly, but also two of my own colleagues, so Rachel Cochrane and Edward Donkor, who are going to support us with the delivery of this masterclass and answer any questions you've got, if you've got any, in the Q&A and in the chat. Just in terms of workshop etiquette, we are going to ask that you remain on mute throughout. There's around 80 of you currently and still people coming in, so you can imagine any background noise would be quite disturbing for other people who are listening in. If you've got any questions, please do put them in the Q&A box, and as I said, colleagues will either answer those live or also we'll be able to answer questions at the end when we have a bit of a Q&A session with both of our speakers today. The webinar is being recorded and we will be sharing that link with you after the event, and slides will also be shared. And for those of you who are dialing in via phone, if you check your email, you should have received a PDF of the slides already. So therefore you can actually access the slides as we are talking. So today's session, we will cover a bit of introduction to leadership and culture. And then we're delighted to be joined by Superdrug and Savers. Kaz King, the Head of People for Head Office Reward and Inclusion, she'll be sharing the Superdrug and Savers story with us. And then we get to have a bit of a deep dive with Joe Mackey, the Customer and People Director at Superdrug and Savers, in terms of some of the questions that may have come up through Kaz's presentation, but also other questions that I know people on the call will be interested to find out more about. And then if I've not asked any questions that you're burning to ask, please do put them in the Q&A as well. We'll have a chance at the end to cover those topics as well. So without further ado, I'll get started. So anyone who joins our masterclasses will recognise this slide in terms of explaining what social mobility is. It's one of those questions that quite often people ask me when I say where I work, you know, this is very much an answer that helps explain it. So it's the link between a person's occupation or income and the occupation or income of their parents. And very much in terms of what the Commission's all about, but also you as employers, is the work that you do to support people in ensuring that where they came from on their start in life doesn't determine their future. And that's very much all of the toolkits and the resources that we provide and the information that we're going to talk about today, that how you can support socio-economic inclusion within your organisation. But why is it important? Why are people, organisations keen to ensure that they are socio-economically diverse and inclusive? Well, we know that diverse teams are successful teams. There's lots of information out there, lots of research that shows that organisations, leading organisations who are you know, doing their part to boost social mobility, they're developing and optimizing their HR strategy and their policies and practices to increase socioeconomic diversity. And they're the companies that all organizations should really be looking at and emulating and learning from their best practice, because those diverse companies are successful companies. So even more important, and that becomes even more important as we come out of the pandemic. You know, in 2008, following the financial crash, you know, we saw real difficulty within the economy, and you know, scholars and academics are concerned, and businesses are concerned as we come out of the pandemic now of you know, how is that going to affect organizations and companies. And so if you know, the more you widen and diversify your talent pool, the better your competitive advantages, and therefore, you know, it's those organizations who are going to succeed in coming out of the difficult times that we've just we've experienced. Those who have longer in the journey have more to offer, a longer journey have more to offer. So on average, you know, you can see on the screen there that some research shows that employees educated at state schools are 75% more likely to feature in the top decile of performers within those law firms. And so therefore, in terms of achievement, you know, they on average outperform their more advantaged peers. And then employees who start as an apprentice from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, they're more likely to stay long term, and this obviously has an impact on driving down recruitment costs. So you don't have to, you know, don't have a churn of colleagues throughout your organisation. And we've seen obviously that they just make better decisions, and in terms of colleagues' well-being as well, if you feel like you fit within an organisation and you belong, you're more likely to stay there, you're more likely to perform well. So it just all leads into sort of better improved business results. But also there's, as well as the business reason for getting involved in socio-economic diversity and inclusion, there's also a moral obligation in terms of encouraging within organisations a fairer society and a fairer opportunity for everyone to succeed within their workplace. So we'd sent out, prior to this event, we sent out some surveys for you to complete, and there's a survey at the end for you to complete as well, just to find out a bit more after you've watched this session. But this is what you told us. So about 62% of you currently collect the socioeconomic data on your employees, and 48% of you are actually using this data to drive interventions, which is great. It's interesting, there's a 15% gap there, so it would be interesting to find out more from those organisations. But for those of you who aren't already, please do visit our toolkits to find out what data you can collect to really to start driving and understanding the impact any interventions are making within your organisation. And over half of you think that, you know, you're in terms of your organisation and your workplace, that your leadership team see the importance of social mobility. And we'll be having that conversation later on with Joe in terms of how Superdrug and Saver's leadership team think about socioeconomic diversity within their organisation, and it really encourages conversation around socioeconomic inclusion to have those senior leaders behind you. And then 48% of you said that your colleagues are committed to supporting those from a lower socioeconomic background. So you've got active allyship networks and an opportunity to share your employees' voice to your senior leaders. So so I'm just going to take a drink. So leadership and culture within your organisation is beyond HR. So it may be something that started by HR, it may be something that started at grassroots level, it's maybe something that's thought about from the leadership team, but it really does, to build it within an organisation, it needs to occupy the minds of senior management and shape the success of your business. And we see this by ensuring a senior leader has visible accountability for the delivery of this agenda. We see this when organisations encourage senior leaders to discuss socioeconomic diversity alongside the more established D&I and protected characteristics. It's not an either-or situation. It fits very nicely into any D&I strategy, and there are, you know, that intersectionality. We're all made up of components of very many different parts, and as an individual, and so are organisations, and that blend of ensuring that an organisation is inclusive for all really can be driven by that conversation at senior level. We see it when organisations ensure that their middle management are aligned to your inclusion strategy. So middle management, if anyone joined our progression masterclass previously, would have seen that, you know, middle management owned that piece around ensuring that everyone has career conversations to help them progress within an organisation, and that, you know, it's imperative in terms of the support that they give their staff. So by making inclusion part of your middle management's performance review, that can drive through culturally through your organisation, you know, a vision of how important this is to your organisation. And we see it where organisations build a positive narrative around socioeconomic diversity, so everyone understands why it's important to you as an organisation, but also that it's one of your priorities, and that you see it as very much part of your business strategy, not just a HR strategy. And leaders can take on this role and really drive those and lead by example with their behaviours and mindset by encourage activity or supporting interventions that are providing socioeconomic diversity to your organisation. So, for instance, reverse mentorships, we've seen a positive take on when organisations have that reverse mentor programs where senior leaders are put in touch with people from different backgrounds within their organisation to really understand and be sort of the voice of hearing and listening to what employees from lower grades are experiencing within the organisation and what they really see about it. But also senior leaders can take part in more formalised sponsorship. So again, if you were on the Progress and Masterclass, we see that informal sponsorship of people can lead to some people being projected into an organisation, you know, and they're recruiting people who look like them, etc. And therefore that informal sponsorship can actually drive skew progression and fast track people. And whereas if you run more formal approach to it, then you can actually make sure that everyone has opportunity within your organisation. Organisations that are successful in terms of creating strong foundations build socioeconomic inclusion into their policies and practices. So, for instance, anti-bullying or procurement processes, and we'll talk about that a bit more later. And they also then create the opportunity for diverse talent to thrive by giving them the opportunity to speak. So regular opportunities to talk and share stories, and for the organisations and the senior leaders to really listen. But also likewise those employees to really come with some actions as well. I think in terms of successful employee resource groups, they are absolutely an opportunity for colleagues to share their experiences, but they can also drive positive action by coming up with solutions and really going to their leaders with this would work better if scenarios. So there's a great opportunity for diversity and inclusion to be threaded through everything within your organisation. So I'm just going to give you a few examples in terms of how you can weave it across inclusion across the whole architecture within your organisation. And I'm going to do that by using a few stories that over the years we've heard from employees or from individuals in terms of their experience. So we've got Debbie here, and she feels really connected to your organisation. She knows your brand. She sees really positive messages on your application forms around inclusion, and so she decides to apply for a post, and she receives additional support to support her through the recruitment process. So additional support for somebody from a low socioeconomic background might be some support in terms of if interview is face-to-face interview, support with travel costs. So there's different things that you can do to support somebody from a low socioeconomic background in terms of hiring practice, and that's actually a future masterclass that we'll be running, so please do watch out for that. But when she gets into your organisation and she feels that she's being overlooked because she's not being asked to, she feels that she's not being asked to work on high level or stretch projects, and she thinks it's because of her accent, and so therefore she feels very disengaged, and so the culture of the organisation's not supporting her from when she's sort of had a very positive experience coming into the organisation and supported to when she's actually in the organisation. Then we've got Lewis. So he was inspired to apply following a virtual work experience week, but he doesn't receive any additional training to help him accelerate his development. And so therefore it's not fed into the architecture of your organisation to support people as soon as they're in the organisation. And also what he's worked out, that his mum works for the contract cleaners, and the working terms are 0 hours, and it's very much not supporting his mum's position. She feels a very tenuous position in terms of how she works. So he's curious as to why an organisation like his, who is supporting socio-economic diversity, is not thinking about the terms that they are thinking about with their suppliers. And then we've got Tom. So Tom volunteers for one of these reverse mentoring schemes, and he has some great sessions. He actually gets paired up with an MD, a managing director within the firm, and he's proud and that his company openly collects information and the data, and that he learns that a number of his peers are becoming D&I allies to drive inclusion within the organisation. So he feels incredibly supportive and very proud of his colleagues in terms of their understanding and supporting other colleagues through their own employment journey. But then we go to how we can then evaluate the impact on behaviour change. So what might within an organisation have an adverse effect? So we go back to Debbie. So as we know, I think she's being overlooked on high-level clients, and she believes it's due to her accent bias. But because the D&I targets and the culture is owned by her manager, she can talk to her manager and understand from a manager that he's really keen to explore developing a diverse and inclusive team, and he talks about it in team meetings, and there's a real shift towards an understanding that mimicking someone's accent is a microaggression, and therefore obviously not acceptable, and it really changes the way the team work with Debbie, and and they really understand by mimicking her accent or not giving her these stretch projects how she's feeling. And then we've got Lewis, whose mum obviously works for the cleaning contract company, and then Lewis's company decides that they're going to engage with their supply chain and be really influential in changing their contractual obligations through their policies and procedures, their procurement policies, that will have better outcomes for his mum. So he feels very proud that his organisation has done this, and therefore feels really like he belongs to this organisation. And then we've got Tom, who had a very positive experience, as we know, and he knows that a number of people are becoming D&I allies to support inclusion. But then he hears people talking about helping out the poor kids, and that language and that narrative is really disappointing to him. So that just highlights the sort of need for a real understanding of the positive narrative around inclusion and diversity within an organisation. So hopefully from those few examples, you've got some ideas of where culture changes and culture shifts can happen. If we just move on to the next slide. So it's very important that socioeconomic diversity and inclusion is owned by all. So there's a real need to celebrate your workforce from all backgrounds. You can talk as allies, you can talk as people who identify. There's a whole range of conversations and celebrations that can happen throughout the D&I calendar. And National Inclusion Week's coming up in September. So if anyone wants to think about how they might use that to really springboard socioeconomic inclusion within their organisation, please do. It's really important, as we've seen with organisations we work with, that senior leaders need to speak about D&I and talk about the importance and the reasoning behind it. And so the business case, but also the moral case for a fairer society. And they really need to demonstrate the commitment. So setting targets and ambitions in terms of the diversity across all of the organisations. So from the staff coming in, apprenticeships or graduates or just trainee roles, right the way through to leadership roles, and to normalise the conversation around socioeconomic diversity. Listening and talking with people who have those lived experiences can really help an organisation understand what they can make, the differences they can make. Policies and practices don't necessarily go in hand within organisations. So making sure that the policies feed through to what is actually happening for those employees. And then if you haven't already got one, and we saw that about 48% of you don't, is that create networks within your organisation and run events and talking and opportunities for staff to engage. And like I say, so the National Inclusion Week's coming up at the end of September. It's a great opportunity. We've just seen we've got Pride Month at the moment, and we've seen a lot of activity around D&I and Pride. It's a great opportunity to have a month in at the end of, well, a week at the end of September to talk about socio-economic diversity. So that's that from me. I'm delighted to be joined by, as I've said before, by Superdrug and Savers. I'm going to invite Kaz King. So she's head of people for head office reward and inclusion, and she's going to talk a bit through how Superdrug and Savers have approached their socio-economic inclusion journey. Kaz.
Thank you, Paula. So yes, thank you for giving us a bit of time if you've dialed into the call. I'm going to give you as much as I can, the best, some of the bits we didn't get right, some of the bits we did. But I'll start by telling you really a little bit more about who we are, because you may or may not be aware of us, both of our brands and our background. So Paula, if you're okay to move on, thank you. So yeah, really, Superdrug and Savers is two businesses. So we've got the Superdrug side and Savers. It's all rooted in accessible health, beauty, and for Savers homeware products as well. I am 4 years into my journey at Superdrug, and as Paula rightly mentioned, I'm looking after, as part of that, inclusion and diversity, but also I get the absolute honour of being the chair of our social mobility network, which we've had going for 3 years now. And I'm really hoping that I can share a little bit about what we do as an organisation. So if we move on one, you'll be able to see what I normally refer to as our like-minded spirit animals. So this is our Access All Areas network. The first big call out I'd make is we don't call ourselves a social mobility network. We absolutely call ourselves Access All Areas, and that's partly because it's not the easiest thing to ask someone if they're in that situation of having come from a lower socioeconomic background or having come from care experience or whatever their journey's been, to go, hey, could you, can I put my hand up in the air to do this thing? And so we wanted to make it much more inclusive and think about the sort of turning it into like a VIP experience, that we take something which might be very difficult but make it much better. And we're really lucky, actually. We've got a group of people who, some of whom I've seen have dialed into the call, so thank you for the support, guys. But we've also, you can see we've got two groups there. One highlighted in yellow, that's our Millennial CSR Committee. They're actually international, so they're working across all different brands from our parent business. And we've also got our CEO, who's the lead, if you like, for social mobility and also for CSR committee globally. So we're really excited to have them. The other person here who's on purple is actually one of our partners. So we try to incorporate our partnerships, and we give them a voice in the network so that they're able to help guide us and steer us as we go through. If I move on to talking a little bit just about more of our ownership, because CK Hutchison is possibly the biggest business in the world that you might not have heard of. So they have 6 different parts to the business, and in the UK in particular, that covers ports. So anything that comes in and out of the Port of Felixstowe, the guys up there are looking after. It also includes retail, which is obviously us. Things like infrastructure, so water and gas and energy. There's also telecommunications. So if you have a 3 mobile phone network, this is part of the CK Hutchison family. And actually in 2019, a slightly different bit of CK Hutchison bought or became involved with Green King pubs. So I'm fairly certain that one of those things that I've just talked about will be touching your life somewhere. The reason I wanted to talk about it, though, because even though they're our parent company and obviously they have an influence in our business, the bit that's more important is this, the bit at the bottom, the Li Ka-shing Foundation, which I don't think is particularly well known in the UK. And if I'm honest, I'm not sure it's particularly well known about in our business either. But Li Ka-shing is the founder of the business, and he himself would be a great example of social mobility. He had to flee his home country during war when he was a child. he had to quit school when he was 14 because his father passed away from illness. And he built what has become a business that spans 50 countries with over 300,000 employees. So absolutely, if you think about social mobility, that is a great example of what he's been able to achieve. And the foundation that he set up is all about paying that back, but it's just very focused in the Far East and Asia. So you maybe don't hear about it here, but it does mean that if I think about all of our business, it's threaded through. The bit that, as I said, we're part of is the retail bit. So on the next slide, we've got some examples of what that is brand-wise. If you are travelling around, well, obviously the UK, you've got Superdrug Savers. We've also got the perfume shop. And then if you are out in Europe, you might have seen ICI Paris or Kruidvat or any of the, if you go to Asia, then you'd be looking at Watsons or Fortresses. So there's a lot of different brands there, a lot of different people, and a lot of opportunity. And retail has always been built on social mobility. You know, most of us start in a job on the checkout or wherever, and we grow up through that business and we learn and we're given that opportunity. And if you're on the call and you're working for, you know, businesses like accountancy firms, law firms, the guys that perhaps are more advanced in the social mobility space, the guys working for us are the students. You know, they're the people that are at college. This is helping put them through their university by working with us to maybe get those jobs with you. So actually, it's all cyclical. The bit I wanted to then talk about a little bit is our Everyone Matters strategy. So this is our total inclusion and diversity strategy that we have. And it started really back in 2018. Now, we'd been championing things before that, like Shades of Beauty, which was really forcing us to have a wider range of foundation shades. We'd had a women's network because we are a 90% female business. So that was very important to us. But actually what we ended up with is these 6 key areas. And access all areas of social mobility actually came out of a few things, but largely a group that I think Paula and I had been part of previously, where it was the first time I'd heard about social mobility. It wasn't something that I think was very well known, and even now it still needs more communication. And what struck me is just so many people that in their life have worked in retail, hospitality jobs, whether that's the thing that starts them off and grows their career because that enables them to do the next bit, or whether they find their home in those businesses and become, you know, move forward into store manager, area manager, regional manager, or head office positions. And what also struck me is that I don't consider myself to have had a lot of advantage in the early part of my life. And even then, when I look back on it now and think, well, actually, it was my mum who helped me drive to my first job, or supported me until I got my first paycheck, you know, my first regular job at 14, all of those things that if you don't have that experience, you don't have that support, is just so important. And certainly as someone who has experienced this, the first time that you hear someone belittle or talk down to somebody that works in a supermarket job, it happened quite early in my HR career. That I remember one of my line managers had come back from her child's school parents' evening, and the teacher had said something along the lines of, well, you know, if you don't work harder, if you don't do a better job, then, you know, you'll just end up working in retail. And that really sticking with her, because she was saying, well, retail's a great career. Retail is a brilliant environment for people. And I think you'll probably hear some of that more from Jo as well about why it resonates with our team. If I keep us moving on to the next one. So what we said as a group was that we were going to have sort of some key statements. This is what we wanted to do. This is why we existed. So the first one really is about making those opportunities accessible for as many people as we can, because it gives us access to the most talent that we can possibly get. And also just really recognising that opportunity just isn't out there for everyone. Trying to find every barrier we can find that helps reduce people's not coming to work for us, and also making sure that we've got real diversity amongst the decision makers, because we're reflecting our customers. You know, if we're trying to be value accessible, making sure that people can get what they need, then we would want to make sure that people making those decisions in our offices or in our leadership teams in our stores absolutely understand the impact of the decisions they make. And then we wanted to understand how we can measure it. Now, this is the bit, data and measurement is the key for all of this. It's the stuff that we're still sort of on the journey of, but I'll share with you in a minute how we're getting on with that. And then also, ultimately, we want to be able to show how that returns value so that we can be the case study that says, well, if we do this, we get a return for the business. And ultimately, like all good big companies, we're there on the ESG. We want to make sure that we reduce inequality and that we improve health and well-being, because that's what we're about. We've got 200 pharmacies. We want to make sure people have the best health and well-being they can, and we know how much this impacts on those areas. So let me tell you a little bit more about what we did. I'm not going to read through all of the stuff on the slide, but one of the things that I did want to say is we started out small. We didn't have a huge amount of budget. We didn't have hundreds of thousands of pounds to throw at this particular area. What we did have was a really established, credible apprenticeship programme. And I know that Sue, who manages our apprenticeship programme, dialed into the call. She can take a lot of the credit for that because it's an amazing programme. But we knew we could do more and we could build on those things. So here's some of the things we did really early on. We introduced a one-for-one work experience policy for our head office. So what we said is, if you use your privilege to get someone work experience, whether that's a niece, a nephew, a cousin, son or a daughter or whoever, that's absolutely fine. You know what, we're not going to take that away from you, but what we're going to ask you to do is to give someone who doesn't have that opportunity, who doesn't have that privilege, we want you to provide a work experience placement in your team for someone, and we'll find the person and we'll match that up. And everyone signed up to that. We doubled our work experience that year, and we were really pleased with it. Obviously, last year we took a bit of a knock because the office wasn't open, but we'll be back strong with that again as soon as we're able to be. Some of the other things that we were able to do is we identified and worked with a partner. I mentioned them before earlier on, that they sit on our network. They're a care experienced organisation, so they're supporting people who come from a care background. We ran our first summer placement programme with them, and what we learned really early on is they don't, if they're coming from a situation where they've been on universal credit and then they're having to wait for their first paycheck, not just are they not able to afford the travel in for that first couple of weeks, but also those integral moments of when you're new into a team and someone says, hey, do you want to go and grab a coffee in the cafe downstairs, become really challenging if you don't have that spare cash. So we tried to take all of that away and said, look, just, the guys in the cafe know who you are, give them a nod, we'll sort it out, so it's not an issue. And we really tried to help them through with that. We also invested quite a bit of time with really training managers, helping them if they were supporting that group, that they understood different types of attachment, how people might behave in that situation, so that we could help through some of the rockier start that a couple of those individuals did have with us. We didn't get everything right. So one of the ones that I thought I'd be totally upfront about is we had mapped all of our stores to cold spot areas. So, the government has this list of the 60 areas in the UK. We know that we've got 56 stores. So we know we can do lots with that. We contacted the store managers. We got a great response. They were all on board. We had over 100 managers, actually more than the 56 stores we approached, said, yeah, we're on board. What do you want us to do? And we just weren't ready for that level of response. And we probably didn't have a clear enough plan of what we wanted to do with it. So that's one of the ones that we know we've got to pick back up and make really good. There's a few others on there that I'm sure you can read. We've also got, in terms of what we're going to do next, we're looking at things like VIP work experience. How can we sort of make work experience just the absolute best it can be for this particular group? And then data. So we already had to collect some data because of our apprenticeship programme. Data is always a difficult one, isn't it? Because people are not always comfortable. I think Paula mentioned it earlier about, why are you asking me these questions? So rather than go out with let's just ask everyone, we started small and we just focused on our management trainee population and our apprenticeships. And we said, well, why don't we just use this group and let's find out about how this group feel? And that's led to us now being able to ask all applicants when they come through the system. So we now ask a couple of questions there. And we've just, in fact, done our first engagement survey where we also asked those questions. And what we were able to see was we had 90% of the people who filled in that survey were happy to share that data. So I think there is a part of that is about then us helping educate the people that are slightly more nervous about it to say, do you know what, there are people that are okay to share it as long as they know why you want it and what you're going to do with it. If we move on, because I'm conscious that I want to get to the good stuff, which will be Joe telling you more about how we landed it with leadership. But how do we know if we get it right? I mean, firstly, we're really proud that we get some recognition for it. We're trying to get even higher in the social mobility index, and if there are retailers on the call, please join it, because we think it's really important. But it also means we'll have more authenticity. We want to make sure that those from a low socioeconomic background look at us and go, actually, this is somewhere that I can progress my career. What we'll also know, if we can move on to the next one, is that we'll be able to measure whether those applicants who are from a lower socioeconomic background are just as likely to be successful and can progress just as much when they get in. That's where we've started our journey. So we're just on the applicant stage at the moment, and then we're going to move on to the progression data collection. And that our teams are as engaged, regardless of whether or not they're from a different socioeconomic background or a lower socioeconomic background. And we want to, as I said before, make sure we've just removed every barrier that we can. And we know we've started doing this, so retail, it does already have a great track record. This is the last couple of years where we've been asking our retail management trainees, and in most areas we're getting it right. There's a couple where maybe we still have to do some work, but you can see these are the index questions actually that we ask on the survey. We're working on it, we're going to get there. But much more importantly than that, the last slide I've got is of two of our team. They're two people who are happy for us to talk about their experience. We've got Andre and Adina. So Andre joined us through the Care Experience summer placement program I talked about earlier. Andre was born in Angola. He came to the UK as a refugee, aged 16. He spoke no English. He taught himself English after social services had taken him in, been through the care system, learned English at home, was accepted into college. He came to us in the middle of his degree. We were so impressed with him. He did such a great job that we offered him a part-time role while he continued his studies. He's now working on robotics in our business and absolutely doing a great job. And then you've got Adina. So Adina is one of our, started with us, as an apprentice. She was living at home with her mum, her younger brother and her sisters. She just loved learning, and it felt really logical to her that she would go to university. But actually what she found was it didn't work for her. It didn't suit what she wanted. And so she left university, set about getting a job in retail, no experience. But actually what she found was the level 2 apprenticeship program, which at first she would quite openly admit she found herself out of her depth, but absolutely recognised that it was a completely new world to her and that she loved it. She's moved on to do the level 3. She's got her sights on becoming an assistant manager, and she now thinks about what kind of manager she'll become when she she's there thinking about how she'll apply everything she's learned about talent and work ethic and manage all of those things. So in both cases, actually, both of these people have then been able to move into flats, do all the things that they want to do and start creating their life. And they're a great example of why this works for us. So I think that's me done. I'm going to hand over to you guys for your chat with Joe.
Brilliant. Thanks. Thanks, Kaz. That's great. It's great to hear that, the actual real life experience of people who have been supported by your approach to hiring and apprenticeships, etc. So it's great to hear those stories at the end. So I'm delighted to welcome Jo Mackey. So she's Customer and People Director of Superdrugs and Savers, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can see just the two of us.
Hi, Paula.
Hi, Jo. How are you?
Yes, I'm good, thank you. Can I just say, I've been trying to answer questions live, but I think I needed a training session before I did it. So
don't worry.
Don't
worry. We'll do some of them now. I've noticed a few of them were already on my list for this chat. So we'll come to some of those questions as I'll answer some of the ones that I've already got prepared, and some of them will also be answered. So brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for trying that. So I think, Jo, first for me is of interest was your job title. So Customer and People Director. You tend to have in organisations, tend to have two very distinct distinct business units. You have the customer, those looking at the external, and then the internal, the people. And so this is quite different for me. And I just wondered how that plays out in Superdrug and Savers, and how it kind of builds your inclusive culture.
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think how it came about, first of all, is that I think one of the things that we're quite good at within AS Watson is promoting internally. We really value internal career paths, and the opportunity arose where one of the directors left, and there was a bit of a gap, and my boss said, do you fancy taking this bit as well as the people bit? And so it was a great development opportunity for me. But there are so many synergies, and I think that now our customer brand and employer brand, it's so much more important that they join together, because what our customers are looking for from us and what our employees are looking for from us, and future employees, are generally the same thing now. So we're joining the two together much more. So we also look after customer experience in store, and that's obviously very much based on our colleagues and the service that they provide. So what came about from a bit of a development opportunity is really driven some synergies in the business, and certainly from a comms perspective, internally and externally, we're incredibly joined up now.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That sounds great. And we often hear organisations talk about, you know, we want to map our community. That's why we need to be a diverse organisation. So it sounds like you've already got those kind of structures in place to do that. So that sounds great. Thank you. So through our extensive work with employers, and I mentioned it before, that we hear that the consideration to look at socio-economic inclusion within your D&I strategy or your HR strategy can either be led by HR, which Kaz has obviously shared with us that it started out there, or through senior leadership starting to think about it, or even from the grassroots level, or a blend of all those. How did you as an HR team engage your senior leaders with this kind of socio-economic inclusion?
Yeah, do you know, in the end, it was really easy. It was very much HR led, and I guess, like a lot of people on the call, we started our inclusion journey because of the gender pay gap reporting, or just before it actually. So it was quite, we started off, as Kaz said, with a women's network, and then we sat down and said, right, it's not just about women, there's a whole group of people, lots of groups of people. So we sat down and mapped out all the different areas, which you saw the different groups that we have, and I've got the circle behind me that it's our Everyone Matters brand. And we started a steering group. Our CEO is the lead on that steering group, we started having quarterly meetings and sharing. I think in the early days, they thought that we were really pushing it hard, and maybe they went along with us, I would say, in the early days. But it's resonated with the business, I think, because we've got such a diverse group of employees in all of the networks. But social mobility kind of covers all of them, doesn't it? There's an element of social mobility across every single network, and it really resonates with the leadership of the business. A lot of them have done that career path themselves. So we've got a commercial director who started off as a Saturday 4-hour contract person a long while ago, but that's how he started. Our CEO started working in supermarkets and has worked his way up. So it generally resonated with a lot of us, although I guess and I look at your definition at the beginning and think, yes, we can tick that, I can tick that. However, I would also agree with what Kaz said. I didn't come from a massively affluent background at all. I'm from Newcastle. I went to a comprehensive school. But you don't realise until you start really digging into it just how lucky, I didn't realise just how lucky I was. and therefore being able to use what we've got in the business to help people move forward in their careers is really important to us, and really possible in retail, So I'd say our leadership team are massively energised by the work that we do, and are incredibly supportive.
Brilliant. That sounds great. It's great to have them so engaged, isn't it, in terms of that? Fantastic. We get, and Kaz touched upon this, we often get employers tell us that out of all the diversity questions that employers ask as part of their HR strategy, or in their annual survey, that the socio-economic background question is the one that is the most emotive, maybe, or people question why you're asking that question. Although research suggests that it's not any more intrusive than asking about sexual orientation or religion, which I think we're more used to being asked that question before. What have you found in Savers and Superdrug? I know Kaz said that you had a 90% response rate, but I know that there were some challenges, and how have you approached it? Is it about setting out why you're doing it anyway, really?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've asked it twice recently. So there's been we've been asking it in recruitment for a while, and it being we generally ask about free school meals. We found that that's the best question that we can ask, and we've had a couple of people out of it. We do literally have tens of thousands of people apply to us, and we've had a couple of queries on that it stood out to people as feeling a bit odd, and then worried that we are going to use that in some way against them, rather than it just being something that we're collecting. And we've tried to do a lot of communication externally about that. Internally, we asked it recently on our engagement survey, and as Kaz said, we had 90% of people actually complete those questions. And not really any pushback at all. We did videos, leadership videos around why it was important, and did a good comms job on it. But again, we've got 18,000 employees, so it's difficult to get to everybody. I did get a comment from a store manager. We do a weekly store managers call just to see what's working well, what's not working so well. And one of them said, I don't understand why we're asking this question as an engagement question. You know, it doesn't mean anything. But once you explain what we're doing and why, it's very well accepted that it's a good thing to do. It's a good thing to do.
Yeah, so it's all about making sure there's that positive narrative that I spoke about in terms of
absolutely, yeah.
Perfect, brilliant. We've seen in all the recent research published around progression, and I know Kaz said that that's sort of your next stage to look at what those barriers are, and that research includes our own recent research that we published on the civil service, that more senior roles are likely to be from professional backgrounds, and if the current leadership team doesn't have the same cultural backgrounds or identities as staff, you know, how can an organisation address this in building inclusive cultures? Have you got any ideas? You know, you talked about a few of your CEO having a low socioeconomic background, but obviously a longer time ago.
Yeah.
How's that allyship played out elsewhere? Or
yeah, it's a really good question. I think it's difficult to change the makeup of the senior leaders that quickly or that easily, because you need the opportunity. We've done a few things. We have you talked about one of them, Paula, which was reverse mentoring, and that's definitely something that's worked really well for us. And I had a reverse mentor for a while. Our IT director's currently got a reverse mentor, and he talks about her an awful lot because she's really helped him think differently. So that's something that we do. Culturally, we're quite a flat and down-to-earth culture, and we're often out in stores as the senior leaders. And I'd like to think that there's an awful lot happens just organically through talking to our colleagues on the shop floor and understanding what's happening. And then we do the usual stuff like listing groups and the engagement survey. Saying that, when we do have senior appointments to make, we are now 100% committed to balance shortlists. So we really try hard at the talent attraction stage to try hard to get that good balance in, so that we've got good opportunity to bring in some diversity.
Brilliant, that's excellent. And that kind of brings me on, we'll be doing a hiring masterclass next, so we'll make sure we remember about balance, shortlists, etc. I think, no one can fail to understand or recognise the impact COVID has had, not only on the retail sector, but also obviously on people from low socioeconomic backgrounds. And, research of ours shows that people think it's, 50% of people think it's widening the gap, and that it has had a really negative impact on opportunities, etc. How did Superdrug how has it been for you in terms, and your organisation, in terms of your colleagues, because obviously as an essential store, I'm assuming you were open for a vast amount of it, but how have you supported those colleagues, and how has leadership kind of driven that support?
Yeah, we're very conscious of it, first of all. So we both brands were classified as essential retailers. So we have been open throughout COVID, and therefore have been operational in the majority of stores. So there were some stores and shopping centres where the whole shopping centre closed, and therefore we also closed. And also there are stores where footfall's just been incredibly low. If you think about central London, we've got a store in Marble Arch, and it's been nothing like what it was. We announced a support package in the very early days of COVID, and really we followed through on that throughout the whole crisis, where we've really tried to support people who've been off, both financially, but also their personal well-being. So we've tried very hard to make sure that communication's been right, that we've been supporting from information on well-being and just that general good information across the business, and doing the right thing. So I like to think that the way we work, certainly as an HR team, is that we have fair employment, and we do our very best to make sure that we treat people well and with respect, and really support that. So yeah, it's a tough time for a lot of people. We appreciate that.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it sounds like you've done, a lot of stuff to support your colleagues, and I'm sure everyone on the call is very grateful for them to be open when everyone else was working from home and in lockdown. So thanks for that. I think we'll get Kaz back in, but just before we do, it sounds to me from what you've said and what Kaz has said that you've got a really supportive leadership team. But is there one thing that they are really proud of and they're really engaged with on your Access All Areas type journey?
Yes, and it's something that Access All Areas is stolen to put it into Access All Areas. So our apprenticeship programme, I am so proud of. We have had so we've been an employer provider now for Sue's on the call, she's going to correct me, I think it's 14 years, Sue, for 14 years, and we've had a number of young people come through that over the years, and they are stunning. Often it ticks the box from a social mobility perspective, but not always, but very often. But it gives people such an amazing foundation to come into retail, in stores predominantly, but also in head office and distribution. And they get fantastic training. They then get both on the job and off the job. and often then go on to become a team leader, and then often on to assistant manager and store manager. It is genuinely a brilliant step on the career ladder. And I noticed somebody on the questions, and I was trying to answer it quickly, said that their daughter had just been through the apprenticeship programme and got appointed to a team leader role, and yay is all I can say, because that's exactly what we want. And yeah, we love our apprenticeship programme.
Brilliant. And Sue, big shout out to Sue, actually.
Big shout out to Sue.
14 years in November, she said. So brilliant. Thanks, Sue. Kaz, if we can get you to come back on. I'm going to have a look now, and I apologies if we don't get to every question that is in the chat. There's quite a number in there. But I saw one, which I think is great, actually, mainly because, Kaz, you're the chair of your social mobility network, and I know, Joe, you're the leadership sponsor for it. Is someone said, have you any advice on how to encourage a social mobility network to start when one doesn't already exist?
Yeah, I would say talk to as many people as you can about what you're passionate about, because the only way that we amassed that group of people was by at every possible. I've probably bored people by the end of it. I'm sure Joe might feel the same. Like, you feel like you're just talking about it to lots and lots of people, but you'd be amazed at how many people we found that way who just said, oh, do you know what, actually I'm really interested in that, or that really appeals to me because of my background, or I feel like I want to make a difference, or I'm working in a function where I know that is a challenge and I really want to get involved. So everyone has their own reasons for being involved in the group, but the only way we got that was by talking about it relentlessly.
Brilliant, thanks. And Joe, can you share what they do for the organisation? What does the network, how does the network support them, the organisation?
Yeah, gosh, ideas, inspiration, making things happen. So we've got a really great group of people across all areas of the business, from retail, distribution, head office. So they enlighten the rest of us, so they're a great source of information, and also challenge us all as a group to look at new, different ways of moving forward. So we're always looking at what else we can do to support people.
Brilliant. And someone called Kenya, I think that is, my glasses, I haven't got my reading glasses on, so it's quite small. The Q&A is quite small on my screen, has asked if you can share materials. So Kenya, if you email contact@socialmobilitycommission.gov.uk, I'll pass your email on to Kaz and Joe, and then they can get in contact with you. Then we have, I think someone asked about, do you think more organisations would get involved with the social mobility agenda or think about social economic inclusion if it were a protected characteristic? And just wondered what your views were on that.
It's a great question, isn't it? Not sure how you would make it a protected characteristic and at what point the cutoff would be. I think it's one of those things that I don't know how on earth you would do it, but possibly, yeah. I mean, that's how disability and sexual orientation has got higher on the agenda. I'm not sure how it would work, but yes, possibly. Kaz, you give much better answers to questions like that than I do.
I mean, I was glad you took that one. It's a real balance, isn't it? Because the more things you put into legislation, it drives an agenda for sure. Does it drive authenticity? That's probably a different question. So I think that might be the thing that I think if you're going to do any of this, it's got to be authentic. It's got to come from
very good point.
A place of wanting to make a difference. It's why I think one of the other questions on there was about, was about networks and getting them to add value and things like that. And I just think if you've got the right people in the network, if they're authentic about what they believe in, it will come, because that you get that from their inner passion.
Yeah, no, exactly. Brilliant. Thank you for answering that. And I think Andrea said, recognising, I think someone had put this, or one of you might have said it, recognise that talent is everywhere, but opportunity isn't. What a great point that hits home. So that's great. so someone has asked, and I'm conscious we're just about near the time, but where was it? Oh, lost it. What is the most common mistake in an organisation's thinking about diversity and inclusion?
Well, I think that you have to have, and this is just adding on to what Kaz has just said, you've got to have passionate people who care about it leading it. And I think if you just give it to somebody as an additional bit of their job, or that doesn't have any passion, or it's a project, it's not going to do anything. You need people who truly believe in what they're doing. They're doing it for the right reasons. And that's absolutely how we've landed as much as we have, because we've got people like Kaz who go on about it a lot. And we put in a role of a senior manager responsible for inclusion, and she's absolutely passionate about it. So and I have to say, they've challenged me massively over the years, where at times I haven't really understood where they were going, and I've felt uncomfortable. But to go with it and believe in the team that really have the passion to do it, that for me is the key. And then trying to upskill and educate people around you is the other piece. I think as soon as we start doing learning sessions and sharing stories, that's when it really started to resonate.
Yeah, no, brilliant. That's excellent. Thank you both. So thanks for you both for being so open and honest with us. I'm afraid we are out of time, so I'm going to leave it there. But and thanks for everyone who's joining. And again, big shout out to Sue for what she's doing in the space. Just a few things from me. Obviously, I'd mentioned before that the slides will be shared with you afterwards, and the recording, look out for that. We will be launching our State of the Nation report towards the end of July, so look out for that as well, in terms of the State of the Nation. So it's our annual statutory report that we release, and so there's some great advice and pointers in how employers can get involved in changing the narrative around this, and also supporting socio-economic inclusion. And as I mentioned as well, we'll be doing a hiring masterclass in September. So once again, just thanks to both Joe and Kaz for sharing the Superdrug and Sabres story. It's been really fascinating to hear, and thank you to everyone who has come on and engaged, and apologies if we didn't get to all of your questions, but we'll have a look and see which ones we can then send out to you and answer for you. So thanks for everyone for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks.